Yeah, so what I want to do today, and I will keep myself very brief, hopefully, and I'll show you some examples and have other voices also talk, so I'm not the only voice you can hear, is to talk about blended learning and what we mean by blended learning, or more recently, flexible learning, when we talk about that here at CPUT. So it's been an interesting journey. I've been at CPG since 2010, and when I started, what we used to talk about is the use of technology in teaching and learning. And very much what people thought of is, how do they use a PowerPoint? How do they use the data projector? Maybe how can they use things like mobile phones in teaching and learning, or clickers, or digital storytelling, or tablets. It was always centered around new tools. But more recently, we have moved to blended learning, or even flexible learning, when we talk about technology-based learning. And I quite like that, because when you talk about flexible learning in particular, the tools and technology are in the background. We're not talking about tools anymore primarily. We are talking about our students and who our students are, and why it is that they need more flexible ways of studying. And that whole idea of a student sitting in class from 9 till 5 is actually not going to work anymore for much longer, and there are many reasons for that. The demographic of our students is changing. More and more students have to work. I mean, you're dealing with these students. They have so many responsibilities and tasks they have to handle while they are studying. This idea that all I can do is focus on studying and nothing else is not working anymore. Sometimes the buses don't work. The central line has been off for 3 weeks now. So what if I can't come to class? What if I'm sick? What if I fall pregnant? What if I have to work? What if I have to attend a funeral? There are lots of things, and I mean, I'm talking to you who know your students best. But this idea that our students come from high school, 19, and start studying full-time the way we thought university is going to happen is not going to happen anymore. And what we need to do is adapt to that. Because if we don't, they will just enroll in any of the online universities that are popping up left, right, and center, and they're going to say, why would I go to CPUT? I can get my online degree from the University of Birmingham. And Scotland is already talking about slashing his study fees, when Brexit will happen. So, I mean, the competition is on, and we need to know that. So for us, even if we are a campus-based university, we need to start thinking who our students are and how we can best support the students that we have, and how we can let go of some of the ideas that we have about higher education and how we were taught and what we think good teaching is, and rather speak to students and ask them what would help them. What would mean student success to them? How could we help them study? How can we make our teaching so flexible that even if I can't come on that train to campus, I can still participate in the learning process? I can still collaborate with my peers. I can still submit assignments. I can still access the lecture content. How can we do that? And then talking about technology makes sense, because now you can think, I mean, if I need somebody to access the content I've done in class, what I'm doing right now, I'm recording myself. I'm creating a small screencast, 20 minutes, which I can share later with my students. And if that's all I've done in my lecture, I mean, why do they have to come to class if they can listen to it, and they can listen to it over and over and over again, and they can stop it and they can listen to it again? And maybe I've even attached to that YouTube video, as you say, a comment functionality. So if people have questions, they just post it there. And I make sure I just go there regularly and see what the questions are and answer. Or I have a WhatsApp group. So while somebody's watching that screencast, they can ask questions and I can quickly answer. So for me, then technology is not the driver, but what is the driver is I want to change my teaching and my students' learning spaces, because I know that thing of them sitting in classroom and getting everything from me in class is not working anymore. That the teacher is the sole information and the person who has all the knowledge, that thing is not working anymore. And you have said it, Freek has said it, we all know. So how can we best use all the tools and technologies that we have at our disposal and create something that becomes a little bit more flexible? And another little step. And I mean, we have spoken with a lot of you already. How do I, step by step, make my teaching a little bit more flexible so it can accommodate the students that I have a little bit better? And every semester I can add a little bit more. So blended learning, the way we're talking about it, is, yes, there are distance education programs starting up at CPUT, and that's something altogether. When we talk about blended learning, it's actually about combining face-to-face teaching, because you're still going to see your students in class, most of you, but also to think how I can free up my students a little bit, how I can reduce the face-to-face teaching a little bit and give them a little bit more flexibility in terms of curriculum design, curriculum delivery, support. People even go so far and say, I mean, we have got a full distance education program now at real estate. The students have to register and do the admission process and the RPL process online. Must be possible. If I offer distance education, I can't expect the students to come and register on campus. And I also can't expect the students to come to the library because they can't access it online. Or I can't expect part-time students who study mainly outside working hours to be able to access a CTS support during working hours. So you have to start thinking, what does it mean to offer flexible support? It must be available after hours. It must be available over the weekend. How can I organize that? Yeah, so this is what we are talking about when we start talking about blended, about flexible learning, about thinking how I can mix and match. Laura Chenowitz talks about unbundling the higher education context. How can I unbundle my course so it's not as rigid and it's not as classroom and teacher focused, but gives a little bit more freedom and flexibility to the students? Does that make sense? So this is a nice definition about blended learning. It's realized in teaching and learning environments where there's an effective integration of different modes of delivery, models of teaching and styles of learning. And that's important as a result of adopting a strategic and systematic approach. So it's not that I'm just trying because it's fun to use technology. I have a serious issue. I have challenges that I want to tackle. And that's why I systematically think, how can I make my teaching and my students' learning more efficient? So if I use technology, it must serve a purpose. It must make my life easier. It must make my students' life easier. Sometimes it won't always work. So there's also a level of experimentation and playfulness. And I mean, things sometimes need a few iterative cycles until they work. So we know that. But it always have to serve a purpose. I need to know why I'm mixing these kind of modes of learning and teaching. So this is just to give you a bit context. I mean, blended learning is a big concept all around the world, and universities are feeling the competition by online master degrees, online undergraduate degrees. It's all over, and there's a commercialization of private education that I'm sure you have seen. I mean, in South Africa, with all the student protests, private education is popping up left, right, and center. So blended learning is a big deal, globally and in South Africa. The New Horizons report by the NMC Horizon reports for higher education have been going on for many years. This year is the first time they're not doing it. But over many, many years, it was a continuous trend. Blended learning design was one of the main things driving innovation in higher education. And it's not something nice to have. It's essential. Here they say, if institutions do not already have robust strategies for integrating these blended learning designs and now pervasive approaches, then they will simply not survive. And I want you to repeat this. We will not survive if we cannot adopt and adapt to the changing context around there. And South Africa, it might be hit a little bit later, but I mean, with the student protests over the last few years, we have had the biggest surge in blended learning and online learning. That was for us, it was the most innovative space ever, because suddenly people saw the reason for going online. Not always easily, and with a lot of ethical issues attached, because how can you continue teaching if the student protests are asking for the academic project to stop? So the ethics around it need to be unpacked and thought of. But in terms of innovation and innovation driver, the student there was nothing that could have happened to us from a perspective of adoption of blended learning. So typical applications, I mean, you've all said, sharing content, both my own content and content that I find from outside. Online communication, the announcement tool of Blackboard is one of the most favor tools on Blackboard because it just sends an email out to everyone. Submission of assignments online. I think there are a few courses that still ask students to submit assignments on paper. Most of them now manage their assignment process online, especially for large classes. Assessment is moved online now. There are online exams that people run with online invigilation. There's a lockdown browser that locks down everything apart from the quiz that people are doing with a little webcam, so you can actually see real estate. The distance education program is doing all their assessments online and distributed. So they need to know, and there's still lots of issues around, plagiarism and authenticity and academic integrity, but there are steps being made towards that kind of context. Online tutoring, the student learning unit is thinking very in depth about how to create a system that would allow mentors and students to connect online. And tracking student success, that's one of our latest projects, the whole learning analytics. So the more you use Blackboard, the more you use a central institutional system, the more you can actually track your students' progress. You can see, and you can actually use it for prevention. So you can see the at-risk students quickly, because Blackboard can give you these reports, how many students have not accessed Blackboard within 2 weeks. And then the alarm bells start ringing, and you can send out an email and saying, what happened? Why are you not accessing Blackboard? Do you have issues? Do you have problems accessing? Do you have problems with access? So it gives you an idea where your students are at any given time. And it also flags potentially at-risk students. So why blended learning? Let me just check how far we are. 50 minutes. So I've talking about flexibility and openness. So for us, that is the main drive. We want to make learning more flexible for students. And in whatever way we can achieve that, we're going to support that. So student needs, students are changing, they have different needs. So how can we best serve them? They have different learning styles. So the library has a project developing open educational resources where they develop the same content as usually as a little booklet, but they also develop a podcast, they develop a video, and they develop an infographic about the same content. So if I like visual content, I go straight to the infographic. And if I want more content and in-depth content, I start maybe reading or I listen to the podcast. So it's this idea that our students learn differently. And the more variety, the more choice, the more flexibility you give them, the better. It's an engagement beyond the classroom. I mean, you're talking about Facebook, you're talking about WhatsApp. People use those tools because those 2 hours you see your students per week are not enough, and we all know that. So how can we keep that discussion going beyond the classroom? How can they keep engaging with each other and with a lecturer beyond the classroom? And that's also where technology, and in particular social media, can really, really support learning. Digital literacies, our students have to develop certain digital literacies. And many of our students are digital literate, but not all. So this is another way of just getting them to use tools and technologies they're going to use in the workplace anyway, and they have to use. So it's also important to think about, a scaffolded approach. You can start with Blackboard because that's a really safe space for first-year students. It's locked down, it's limited access, they can experiment and make mistakes, but eventually they'll have to have some engagement with the real world out there. I mean, depending whether you have media studies students but really everyone, sports management, eventually they'll have to create a blog where they market themselves, or they market an event. They have to learn to engage digitally with the online world beyond Blackboard. So you need a nice mix. Student tracking I've talked about, and answer to disruption. I mean, for us that was the major push over the next 3 years. And it's really interesting because once somebody has started using more blended or flexible learning during the student protest, they're going to continue using it in the normal teaching as well, because it has a lot of benefits, whether or not students are on campus or not. So this is a nice graph I found from the Center for Higher Education, just to understand, because there's always a lot of confusion. So are we talking distance education? Are we talking campus-based education? It's a continuum, and it's a hybrid. And most of us will be somewhere in the middle, where we still have campus-based education, because all but one course at CPUT are currently accredited as fully campus-based. So even part-time education, part-time programs like open architecture, which is really mostly online, they're still accredited as campus-based for various reasons. So we always talk about campus-based, but in some ways we blend. Yeah, we allow students to do some assignments, some engagement with content outside the classroom in their own time. So we can cut down on teaching time and allow them to do certain activities, certain practices outside the campus-based environment. Are there any questions so far? Or does it all still make sense? Yeah? So these are just some examples to show you like the continuum at CPUT. I mean, who has heard about the flipped classroom? Who has used the flipped classroom in their teaching? Show me, raise your hands. Dan, do you want to talk? What is the flipped classroom? Okay. Yeah, sure, let us know.
So when I posted notes with additional readings of that book linked to the full class, we could actually just pick up from the reading. So I didn't have to teach from the beginning. They had to read additional material on the notes that we've done before, and they had an opportunity to ask questions from that additional reading, and we could just pick up a lecture from there. So I think it worked, but that was for I just tried it, and I think it worked for that particular topic that we were doing.
Yeah, so the flipped classroom basically turns everything around. You do the homework in class and you do the teaching outside class. So you look for information, for YouTube videos, for reading materials that theoretically the students have to engage beforehand. And ideally, you link it to a test or a quiz to make sure that they've actually covered the material. And ideally, you also provide some sort of communication platform that they can ask questions while they are engaging with the materials. And then you use your classroom time for more interaction, discussion, group work, problem solving. So in particular in engineering, a lot of people do that because that thing of solving problems on a whiteboard and people copying you solving that problem has become so boring that a lot of people just make a short video of themselves solving that problem once, and the video that they share it with the students and they can watch it over and over again, and then in the classroom in groups just do the homework, apply that problem or that specific procedure to other examples. So it depends on your topic, but Jonathan Asperling, who teaches accounting, I think, in business, teaches a postgraduate master course, and he says his students have not been at university for 5, 10, 15 years. They have a lot of practical example, but the theoretical foundations are outdated. So he provides all that foundation work outside the classroom, so they have to come having listened to those basics so that they can then jump into the more applied, the more advanced stuff in his teaching. So he basically prepares them for class outside class. And he has mature students so they understand and they engage with that. And younger students, first, second year, it will take some time to change the culture and to actually make them understand that, as you said, it's not because I'm lazy that I don't teach, but it's because I believe that the results and your marks will be much better if you listen to these lectures beforehand and then we do in-depth work in class. So it's a way of managing expectation and explaining over and over again and showing results. Showing that other lectures have done this and the results are that actually the grades have gone up dramatically. And there are people who have done that at CPUT. That data is available. How much time do I have? Okay, I want to show you a little YouTube video. This is Bronwyn Swartz in engineering, who has taken the whole screencasting a little bit further.
My name is Bronwyn Swartz, and I'm a lecturer, and I work in the Department of Industrial and Systems Engineering at CPUT and Belleville campus. I lecture statistics to BTech quality students as well as first year industrial engineering students and research methodology to BTech students as well. And so I'm going to tell you a little story about what I've recently experienced and what I've come to learn. Welcome to my world. This is the building that I lecture in. This is the mechanical engineering building, and these are pictures of some of the students that have been in the class. And these are some of the individuals that have really inspired me and motivated me to do what it is that I've done. You see, these pictures, all of students weren't in formal class. These pictures were taken on Saturdays or after hours when they on their own decided to get together and I happened to know about it and I happened to be around and they did this to make a success of their studies. They did this to create better futures for themselves and for their families. And this is why I also want to improve my teaching practice so that I can support them. Now, we all know that under normal circumstances, lecturing is challenging. For me personally, the biggest constraint that I always face is time. There's never enough time. And this is especially true in 2013 when I had a class of statistics students. I had 220 students in one class. And I knew that I couldn't work harder. I needed to find ways to work smarter. Just marking one homework was taking me 3 weeks. And that's when I decided to embrace technology for my teaching. I slowly started using the LMS, the Learner Management System, Blackboard. And what I initially started doing is I started posting besides the notes that I made available on Blackboard, I started posting pictures of the board. Like we'd have a class and I post a picture of the board and I encourage us to discuss the board because we couldn't have all of these discussions in class time. It was just little time. And I also then started giving them homework, giving them homework and allowing them to submit it on Blackboard, which helped me cut down my marking time. And then in 2015, we were hit by phase must fall. That was the first time we had phase must fall. And this really shook us up. It was nothing compared to 2016 phase must fall, but this made me realize I needed to start using technology even more. And I started then making screen cards. And the advantage of this is it made me realize there were creative ways I could stretch what I was doing. And because of what happened in 2015, and because I started experimenting even more, in March 2016, I actually had my first online exam. It was a midterm exam and it was a success. And these are pictures taken of that midterm exam. And not only was I learning, the students were also feeling more confident about using online technology. At the same time, more or less the same time, I was invited by a lovely lady, Daniela, to participate in the Open Education Resources Project at CPUT. And where that was good for me is, being part of the team, we could share ideas and we could encourage each other. And I learned a lot. For me, it educated me. It was informative and I learned about Creative Commons. And I also got ideas of what the other team members were doing. And it just encouraged me to experiment it, practice it, try new things. And then the bombshell hit us in about October 2016. We had the Fees Must Fall again. And this time, Fees Must Fall was characterized by really violent protests and massive destruction of property and lives calculated not only the students but the lecturers as well. At the same time, I knew what some of my final year students were facing. They needed to finish. It would have a huge impact on them personally, and they already made significant personal sacrifices to be able to finish. And we were about 70% done when Fees Must Fall started, but with their help we managed to finish. And what we then did, what I did with their help, we used Blackboard or we used the Learner Management System even more. We had previously used discussion boards and journal entries. We maybe used it 50% of the time. We increased that to 100%. We were using it all the time, virtually every day. I use screencasts. I now have screencasts on almost every topic in my curriculum. And then I also realized that data was becoming a problem for some of my students. And because of that, we moved to Google Drive, and eventually we even moved to YouTube, where the students could access the how open educational resources has changed my life and my teaching practice. Thank you.
So this is just one example of a lecturer changing her teaching. She had to respond to external factors, but it made a deep impact on her teaching in general. So she's using a lot more of the kind of tools and activities and engagements that she had with her students during the protest also in her normal teaching, because often you have to prepare students, so they need to have confidence that they are able to do.
A diverse student population with different social and educational backgrounds as well as.
So the idea for her was she would prepare, no matter whether the student process are happening or not this year, she's going to start now already preparing her students in case it will happen. So they will do online tests regularly. They will do online exams. She is using those screencasts over and over again. The students, half of her teaching has actually been moved online beyond the classroom, just to prepare students for the worst case. But at the same time, actually really innovating her teaching and making it a lot more flexible for her students. We don't have time to show you the YouTube link, but I've put the link there. This is the short reflection from a student's perspective on the open architecture course, which is another really interesting and innovative course offering at CPUT that's offered mostly online. So Yolanda Moko, who is running this course, has moved all the crits, because that was always the holy cow of architecture, and that's why people kept saying you can't teach architecture online, because what happens to the studio time? What happens to that modeling, to what you do in the studio? And she has taken it online in Skype mentoring sessions where she crits students' work online, and they record it, and other students can be present and listen to it, and they can watch it over and over again. So she has managed to move and to offer a BTech part-time architectural technology program to students who are working. So these are all in full-time employment, and they're still enrolled in a part-time BTech national diploma in architectural technology. So again, flexibility. It's not easy, but you can do it. Time for break. There's food outside. Please go, grab something. And if possible, if we could be back in 15 minutes, that would be lovely.
It's a lot of switching.